Picture a timeline where the Industrial Revolution didn't begin in 18th century London, but under the blazing sun of ancient Greece, 2 millennia earlier. In this reality, steam-powered hoplites crossed the Atlantic to colonize the Americas, and by the Middle Ages, humanity is already walking on the moon. That sounds like pure science fiction, but historically speaking, that timeline was entirely possible. The technological leap was sitting right there, waiting to be triggered. The reason we don't live in that highly advanced world right now comes down to a single catastrophic strategic error made by the smartest man in antiquity. This marble bust shows the face of Thales of Miletus. You might recognize his name from textbooks as the father of philosophy. He lived in ancient Ionia on the coast of the Aegean Sea, an environment wealthy from early trade and perfectly positioned for intellectual inquiry. On May 28, 585 BC, the Lydian and Median armies were slaughtering each other near the Halys River. Suddenly, the sky went pitch black. Thales had successfully predicted a total solar eclipse. The terrified armies dropped their bronze weapons right there in the dirt and agreed to a lasting peace. But doing the math to predict the date was secondary. Thales' real breakthrough was recognizing that lightning strikes and eclipses weren't the erratic moods of Zeus or Apollo. He realized that nature operates like a predictable, interlocking machine. If you can decode that machine, you gain absolute control over the people living inside it. Thales held the ultimate weapon of the ancient world, yet he chose to use it as a teaching moment, to remain a wise observer, rather than seizing the opportunity to become an emperor. Let's consider the alternative. Imagine Thales rejects the role of the humble philosopher and instead strikes a covert deal with King Croesus. He uses Lydian gold to fund his designs and points to the eclipse to convince both empires that the gods demand their submission. As the sun vanishes, Thales deploys applied hydraulics and early chemical fires based on his deep studies of water and matter. He leverages the terrifying darkness to obliterate any resistance, conquering the known world in an afternoon. The endless bloody skirmishes between Athens and Sparta are erased. In their place rises a strict corporate dictatorship run from Miletus, where mathematical efficiency is the highest law. This map illustrates how quickly the Aegean and Black Seas would integrate. Within a few generations, his disciples develop water pumps to replace manual labor, lay down primitive rail lines moved by steam engines, and build a rapid optical telegraph network out of mirrors. The Mediterranean basin becomes a sealed, hyper-advanced ecosystem dictated by a single technological superpower. In this timeline, the mighty Roman Empire never gets off the ground. Rome remains an obscure agrarian farming village, forced to pay licensing fees to the Ionians just to use the wheel. Traditional personal religions never take root. Instead, society bows entirely to the logos, the objective law of the universe. Humanity effectively begins worshipping data. Now, you might assume Thales was too much of an academic to ever attempt something so Machiavellian, but we know for a fact he possessed exactly this kind of cutthroat instinct. Historians recorded that Thales once studied weather patterns and astronomical data to predict an unusually massive olive harvest. Well before winter ended, he quietly went out and secured the leases on every single olive press in Miletus and Chios. This chart overlays the sudden financial spike he engineered. When the massive harvest hit, demand skyrocketed, and he rented the equipment back to the desperate farmers at extortionate rates. It was the first recorded corporate monopoly in history. He executed this flawless market manipulation simply to prove to his critics that a philosopher could easily become wealthy. He had the capacity to control physical and economic systems perfectly, but he completely refused to apply that scale of control to geopolitics. Stepping back into our actual timeline, we have to ask, if he understood the mechanics of the universe so deeply, why didn't he build the world his formulas mapped out? Thales operated on the assumption that simply uncovering the truth was a sufficient final goal. He treated the logos, the logic of the universe, as something to be discovered and shared, rather than a framework to be enforced. But truth cannot survive in a vacuum. To actually shape society, a theory requires a rigid structure and a system of enforcement to translate a discovery into a global reality. For those seeking to change the world, Thales' career serves as a warning. He built a school of thought when he could have built an empire, illustrating that an intellect that understands the world but lacks the will to dominate it remains a decorative element in history. This ancient dynamic is visible today. We see engineers building predictive AI algorithms who perfectly understand the underlying data, yet they often leave the actual deployment and governance of those world-shaping tools to others. Knowledge of the future serves no strategic purpose without the infrastructure to command it. In 585 BC, Thales stood in the shadow of an event he alone had mastered. But by choosing to remain a passive observer, he ensured the world remained exactly as it was.